So, the sun's shining, it's the end of autumn, it's a brilliant day. Let's go for a ride. I've got a fantastic story for you down near Heathcote. It was sunny when I left home. So, I have helmet here, I'm a bit wet. It was sunny when I left Bendigo, I swear. I'm in Heathcote in central Victoria, and like many of the towns in central Victoria, this is another gold mining town. So, left with a beautiful legacy, we'll probably come and have a look at some of the buildings around here, maybe do a five of here as well. But we want to talk about something else that happened here. So, imagine yourself to be a gold miner who's come here. You've come to the McIvor goldfield in the early 1850s. You've started scratching around, you've found a fair bit of gold, you've got this in hand, but you've got a problem now. Your gold really means nothing. It's worth nothing to you. Till you can sell it to someone, you can pass it on or do something with it. Now, you might be able to sell it here on the goldfield if it's a big enough town. There'll be someone who can buy your gold from you, but you'll get a better price in Melbourne. And you've worked for this is your income, so you want that better price. The problem is, the roads are actually quite dangerous. There's highway robbery, there's bush rangers, people there to steal your gold all the time. You could get on a stagecoach, but the stagecoaches themselves were getting robbed quite regularly, so that may not be a great option either. What happened in the end was the government stepped in and they started making gold escorts, and they would actually have armed escorts to protect convoys of gold down the highway in the 1850s. That's how dangerous it was. We actually needed military intervention to make the roads safe enough to travel. For various reasons, these gold escorts weren't always that popular. They were run by the government, they were bureaucratic. They only service certain towns, and generally the largest towns, so one came down from Bendigo, Geelong, places like that. McIvor didn't get a government escort. You could meet the government escort at Kyneton, but you'd already travelled a fair way and you'd been vulnerable at that time. So the other issue with the government escorts is basically you handed over your money, you paid a fee, it wasn't a free service, And at the other end, you had to provide a receipt that you were given at the start. You had to provide a description of your gold, and you had to provide proof of identification. And if you couldn't satisfy those three criteria to the government's liking, you forfeit the gold. They would take it, and that happens semi-regularly, much to people's horror. And the government's delight, no doubt, having already paid for this service. Furthermore, the government actually provided no guarantee the gold was going to get there. If they lost it, it was still too bad. Not a great deal. So what happened was there's actually a private enterprise that stepped in, and there were private gold escorts happening in various parts of Victoria, and there was one servicing the McIvor goldfield here. So a company in Melbourne would send a small team up here. There's the cart, they load it up, get receipts. The gold would be, again, for a fee, escorted down to Melbourne under armed escort. Trouble with these escorts is you've raised the safety of the gold, you've raised the security around it, but you've also raised the stakes. So if you rob a random person on the way home from the goldfields, you might get enough gold to keep you fed and pocketed for a couple of years. You might strike it lucky and get more. If you rob a gold escort, you're going to make enough money to set someone up for life, maybe multiple people for life. I think you can see where this is going, right? On the 20th of July, 1853, a private gold escort leaves the McIvor goldfields down this road, eventually heading to the Melbourne Treasury via Kyneton and Mere. It's escorted by 6 people. There's one driver for the carriage and another man sitting next to him, and 4 mounted troopers. The carriage contains 3,000 ounces of gold and about 700 pounds worth of banknotes. In today's money, 3,000 ounces of gold is worth about 19 million Australian dollars, and that actually probably still understates the value in the world back then. The very first gold escorts ran from the major centres, the Ballarats, the Bendigos, and they ran through to the Treasury in Melbourne. As I said, run by the government. They were escorted by a mix of government troops, native police, that is Indigenous Australians who were recruited as police. You can imagine how handy their skill sets and their ability to track and understand the bush would have been out here. And regimental soldiers from the British Army. The 40th Regiment of Foot was allocated to the British colony, and it was often used to guard these escorts. There's a phenomenon in the goldfields referred to as 10-mile towns, and they're often linked to the gold escorts. 10 miles, about 16 kilometres, was considered the distance that people could travel in a day on foot, and often their towns appeared at 10-mile intervals to service people travelling through and the gold escorts as they pass through. The distance from Heathcote to Mere is 10 miles, and it may be an example of a 10-mile town. Quite famously, the soldiers protecting these escorts were instructed basically if someone was up ahead on the path at 50 yards, close enough to 50 metres, they were to be challenged, get out of the way, we're coming through, whatever. If they didn't move, they were to be fired upon with the intent to kill. These guys were not messing around. If you get the impression that the government's control on this colony in the 1850s was pretty tangible, I think you're probably right. The 6 of them are travelling towards Kyneton via this road. They come round a bend and there's a tree freshly cut down, and there's a bush shelter, a Mere on the side of the road. They stop the convoy and almost immediately come under gunfire. And 4 of them are wounded and incapacitated. A couple of the horses are killed. The 2 guys at front push forward past the blockade on the road. They turn around and they start shooting back at their attackers. There's a bit of gunfire, but it happens at a distance where it's probably not effective. They run out of bullets, decide they're going to head for help rather than try and take them on before reloading. Guns were different back then. It's hard to get a word in on this road. Much quieter back then, I'd imagine. So I'll explain to you why I think the attack probably happened just back up there. So, where did this attack happen? Well, the reality is we don't actually know. That's the accurate answer. The much more interesting answer is to speculate and see if we can have an educated guess. So, let's do that. This is Heathcote over here in the top of the screen. We zoom in a little bit, you can see it. The former McIvor diggings, as it was at that point. Heathcote hadn't formally been named. Down here is McIvor, as we said, about 16 kilometres, 10 miles apart. Now, the attack is supposed to have happened, and the numbers vary a little bit, but about 6 kilometres from McIvor and about 10 kilometres from Heathcote. So, if you like, about 2/3 of the way. There's a few other criteria. It was near a bend in the road. The party were travelling uphill, and there was sort of a hillside that overlooked the area of the ambush. So if you look at this sort of area here, which is sort of where we're talking, this corner's probably a little bit too close, although there is an account that says about 3 miles, and that would put this right in it. But it seems to mostly be in this area here. And I quite like this corner because a few of the others don't really fit. So if we drop in the little guy here and go a little close to the top of the hill, it changed seasons all of a sudden there. Even right up here. And this fits our criteria. So we've got a bend here going around the corner. We've got a hillside that overlooks the site, potentially on both sides. Remembering this would have been level with the ground most likely then. Obviously it's a nice graded modern road today, but wouldn't have been then. And generally fits the criteria. Most of the other bends don't. Now granted, you've got to assume that the road hasn't changed course in that time, and it may well have. But I don't really see any evidence of an older road, and I don't see any reason for it to significantly move. It's probably been straightened out, and really the landscape probably looks nothing like it did, but I reckon this is a good fit. So if you imagine a tree across the road here somewhere, this was all bushland and not farmland, shelter on the side of the road, people hiding in the trees. They've stopped here somewhere. Gunfire's broken out almost immediately when they've stopped. The 4 guys at the back on the horses and on the carriage have been injured. 2 guys at the front have pushed past the tree that was on the road, the barricade, and then shot back at their attackers, but had to run off eventually when they've used up their ammunition. So apparently that's how the attack went. Almost immediately as the gunfire started, more people came out of the bush and just started grabbing the gold in the sort of protective cases it was in the carriage and walking off with it. So the attack's over in just a couple of minutes. The guys that go for help return with reinforcements, and pretty soon there's massive search parties combing the countryside looking for these guys. Apparently up to 400 people, including volunteers, armed volunteers, locals, police, even military, hunting the countryside. No sign of them for now. In total, they've got away with some 2,223 ounces of gold. Less than the 3,000 quotas on the carriage, and I'm not sure why there's a discrepancy. Maybe they didn't carry it all, maybe they just didn't get it all. And 700 pounds of banknote, so quite a profitable exercise for them. You do get a sense that there was a real sense of outrage in the community about the brazen sort of audacity of this attack. Huge numbers of volunteers came out to hunt for these people, and no doubt there was a reward, but there generally seems to be outrage that this attack has happened and a desire to end the recklessness and the lawlessness on the roads. So none of the people wounded died at the scene, but the driver of the carriage, Mr. Folks, would die from injuries a little bit later on. So there was no sign of these guys despite the massive manhunt. It was some detective work that actually led to the first lead they really had. Now, following up the theft of a pistol from a tent in Collingwood, this led to the arrest of 2 brothers, George Francis and his brother John Francis. They were actually on board a ship, the Madagascar, that was due to set sail for London quite shortly. George Francis provided a lengthy statement to police in exchange for being Queen's witness, which means he was free of being prosecuted. He was absolved of the case. He was given a £500 reward and was to be given passage out of the colony, which is only fair to give him a ticket back to London since they've been dumping their criminals on us for decades. He provided a list of 10 names of people who were involved in it, which included his brother. George was being transported back to Melbourne for trial. He got his hands on a razor at a stop there and actually took his own life in transit. John, George's brother, was offered the same deal to become Queen's witness under very similar terms, and he accepted that, and it turns out it wasn't the first time he'd escaped the gallows by accepting an offer of Queen's witness. While George had named 10 separate people involved in the attack, John claimed there was only 6.
Sky all bruised, wheels roll.
Based on his testimony, a man named Wilson was also arrested on the Madagascar about to flee the country for London. As he was being rowed from the Madagascar into the bay, he passed under another ship, the Colony, that was also about to leave for Mauritius. He asked to speak to a man named Melville and asked him to take care of his wife. The police promptly searched Melville's possession and found him in possession of about £800 worth of money. Incredible amount. He was arrested.
It lights my fuse. Sip it slow. Let the warmth diffuse.
Both of the Francises had talked about a man named Gray, who had been apparently the leader of it. Conveniently, no sign of Gray could be found. They both said that he had fled in a different direction and gone to South Australia, while the rest had headed to Melbourne.
Dust on my boots.
The testimony from the wounded troopers stated that they felt they were attacked by somewhere between 10 and 15 men, but only 4 would face court. John Francis, as Queen's witness, was acquitted. The other 3 would hang. The Francises had claimed that the gold had been divided evenly between them, as had the money, shortly after the robbery in the bush, not far away from the scene. If this was the case, then the amount of wealth recovered was only a fraction of what was missing, suggesting it's likely there were more. As the death sentence was being read out in court, Melville came into a savage attack on the informer Francis, but he was stopped by the judge, who advised him to diverse his mind of malice and prepare himself for the death that awaited him. Melville then said, "May God forgive me, as I forgive John Francis," and sat down.
Paper cut in a calloused hand, a bit of love I understand. Liquid sunrise keeps me sane.
So this is McIvor, the next town along the road from the Robbery. We move on a little bit further to Reedsdale and then on to Kyneton, and then from there you can head down to Melbourne, and that's the route the Gold Escort would have taken. It's a pretty little town today, and it's been here a very, very long time. And just in behind these bushes on the roadside, something pretty cool. I'll show you from the drone. Okay, going to interrupt this. Slight disclaimer here. My mum actually reliably informs me that the town is not McIvor, it's McIvor. So if you're a local and I've been pronouncing your town wrong, I apologise. McIvor it is. I've said it way too many times to change the video now. Thank you. So this is the McIvor Hotel, or what's left of it. Now, originally a wooden building, replaced in stone. I'm not sure what year, I'll put it down below. Apparently Burke and Wills expedition, when they came through McIvor on about day 6, most of the officers and Wills stayed at this hotel. Burke stayed with some local pastoralists. You know, there's no prize for being uncomfortable, but pretty cool piece of history. McIvor Hotel. This, according to the Francis' testimony, was where the criminals all met up, basically prior to the attack, and they planned it here. They said most of them were armed with horse pistols, and if you think of a single-handed sort of small shotgun, in the black powder days, it's probably not far from the truth. It's like a pistol that was too big to be sort of regularly used as a normal pistol and carried. It's designed to be carried in a saddle in a special holder. So the horse pistols were double loaded. They had put pellets in there like a shotgun and a bullet in front of that, which is something you could do with them. So they would have fired a single shot before reloading, but they would have fired a big bullet and then a whole bunch of little projectiles. So the troopers were probably hit with a whole lot of smaller pellets and had multiple sort of moderate sized wounds. which you can understand them sort of being incapacitated in one shot. The Francis has said that part of the reason they ended up testifying was that they were horrified by the attack. In the end of the day, they'd signed up for a robbery, and when they just opened fire and shot everyone, they were disgusted basically and didn't want a part of it. The numbers given for the attack vary. Even the Francis has varied about how many people were actually involved. One saying 6 and one saying 10 were involved in the attack. The troopers said between 10 and 15 people attacked them. Some of the others who were charged initially on the testimony of the Francis brothers were found with tickets for the Madagascar, who were going to depart and head for London. There's speculation that if you went through the passenger list for that ship, you'd find more of the names who were involved, and it's quite possible, obviously, speculation again. So the thing about the Madagascar is a mystery around that ship. It was delayed for bad weather, and that's the only reason the police caught who they did aboard. When it did up anchor, it set sail and headed out through the heads down at Queenscliff, bound for London, and it never arrived, and no sign was ever found of the ship. No idea what happened to it. It was a huge mystery, and this was a big ship in an era where sailing wasn't as dangerous as it had been previously, so it was actually quite unusual for a ship this size to disappear. Approximately 160 people on board, 2 ton of gold in its hold, no sign of it. There's one little twist to this story that's a little bit macabre at the very end of it. So after the execution of George Melville, his wife came to authorities and asked for the release of the body so she could organise a burial for it. And this wasn't the practice at the time, but there was no strict rules around it. So after a bit of back and forth, the body was released to her. Now, she owned an oyster shop in Little Burke Street in Melbourne. And she's put the body on display in the window of the oyster shop. There's some debate about why she did it. It doesn't seem to have been just about selling additional oysters. Apparently it was dressed up nicely, there were flowers, it was decorated, and she said she was doing it in protest, basically the way her husband had been treated, to highlight it. But the sort of sideshow thing brought people in. Bushrangers were notorious, they were famous criminals, and it drew a huge crowd to come and have a look at this body. And it said she was charging £half a crown a gawk, half a grand a view, to see the body. So maybe there was some money involved in it too. When authorities found out, the police came, seized the body. It was taken back to the prison and interred there. And the rules were changed, and basically from that point, everyone who was executed in the Victorian colony was buried on prison grounds with no exceptions. But bizarre, isn't it? So that's it. That's the story of the Gold Escort robbery at Mia. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like and subscribe. Thank you.